Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss fantasy Formula 1. The British Grand Prix has concluded and my, what a race it was. And my, what a week it's been for F1 in general. Nico Hülkenberg's first podium, I could not stop crying when that happened. So delighted for him. I mean, it definitely has been a long time coming. And now, this morning, I'm waking up to the news that Christian Horner has been fired this week. Man, if you started watching F1 this week because of the F1 movie, this is not how the sport always is. But sometimes this sport provides some banger entertainment, and this has certainly been a week for that. But now we have 2 full weeks of downtime before Spa. Spa being a sprint weekend, so there's a lot of things to consider for our F1 fantasy teams. Let's get right into it. But first, let's discuss what happened in Silverstone F1 fantasy wise and how I've profited from it. So it's another amazing weekend. I mean, this weekend really could not have gone better for me in any way. Like, there was not a conceivable way that I could have made a team better than this one for the British Grand Prix. I mean, obviously, if I put the 2x on Hülkenberg, I would have gotten more points, but I was never going to put my 2x on Hülkenberg, right? So in terms of realistic moves I could have made last week, I ended up making by far the best ones. I used 2 out of 3 free transfers, so I kept a transfer going into Spa, meaning I have 3 free transfers for this very, very important sprint weekend. And the 2 transfers I ended up making were Gasly and Hadjar out for Behrman and Ocon in. Obviously, Gasly ended up having a really good weekend, increasing 0.6 million, scoring 15 points, but Ole Behrman scored more points than he did, right? So overall, I'm really, really happy. And obviously, Hadjar as well had a DNF, so great job selling him. But the best decision of mine was actually not who I sold, but who I didn't bring in. Gabriel Bortoleto was a decision. Bringing in Gabriel Bortoleto was almost like an obvious decision last week prior to FP3, or at least prior to the practice sessions, because of how good he was for budget. But I just did not trust him after what he had showed in practice. He did not look confident in the car, and that is something I discussed in my videos last week and the week prior to that, and we should start listening to these midfield drivers, how they feel about the car in practice, and see also how they perform in practice, since the midfield is so close. Specifically, my one example of that was Hadjar a couple of weeks back, when he said after practice that he did not feel good in the car, and then VCarb ended up having a really bad car that weekend. He only scored 1 point, and we could have predicted that as F1 fantasy strategists if we had just listened to what he said. And Gabriel Bortoleto, 2 spins, and one of them ending up in a crash in FP3. There was, rumors or concerns rather that the car would not be fixed in time for qualifying. I had none of those concerns. My tip for whether to bring in Bortoleto or not was essentially, if you already have him, you obviously don't sell him, right, because he looks good for budget. But if you don't have him, I would buy the Haas guys instead, and that's what I ended up doing, because I didn't have Bortoleto for his good score in Austria. So, which, by the way, that was probably a mistake to not bring him in then, because he did look really confident in the car. But I didn't have him, so I didn't buy him, and he got a DNF, meaning that my decision to not buy him the week prior actually kind of helped me there, because there was no way I was ever going to sell Bortoleto if I'd had him. But, I mean, Behrman, starting from last, ended up being kind of a no-brainer with the penalty that he got, 16 points. Ocon, 7 points, not fantastic, but ended up increasing in price. He was also really good for budget during the week. So, on F1 Fantasy Tools Elite Data, if you look at the Patron 500, so the top 500 patron users on F1 Fantasy Tools, which usually are 500 very, very engaged strategists, about 28.2% of the top 500 brought Bortoleto in this week, for a total of 55.3% in the top 500 owning him, because about 30% already had him from the prior weekend, right? And then Ocon, by example, was only owned by 38.6%. Granted, he was brought in by more people, but the people who had already had Bortoleto obviously did not end up selling him. So Bortoleto owned by a massive 55.3% in the top. I was one of the people not owning him, meaning that I gained quite a lot of positions due to that. And you can kind of see that although I'm not in the top 500, right? Maybe I'm actually in the top 500 on the F1 Fantasy Patreon now. I don't actually know what the Patreon looks like on F1 Fantasy Tools, but my current overall score is now, my overall rank is the best it has ever been. This is the highest I've ever gotten in F1 Fantasy before, 3,125 global rank. And considering, I know I've said it before, but considering where this team that you're watching right now, where this team started at the beginning of the season, you can go back and watch the team selection video after Australia. It was terrible. It was so bad. I had the worst start to the season you can imagine, and I've climbed it up to 3,125. My best prior rank ever. Last year, if you follow the channel, you will know I never reached ranks this high. I just barely got into the top 10k at the end of the season, finishing in like around 9,000 overall rank. And the year before that, my best ever score, I didn't end up that high because I had a really bad end of year in 2023. But I was about rank 4,000-ish in the world. 4,500, I believe, in 2023 during my peak. So I've hit a new peak for, my personal F1 fantasy experience, 3,125. Again, mental. And is it too early to sort of say that top 1K is possible? I don't think it's too much to say. I obviously to have really good weeks, get the differentials correct. When I do go for a differential, right? But I do think the differential picks, it doesn't have to be something big. It doesn't have to be, sell Piastri and bringing Lewis Hamilton in. It could be as simple as just not having Bortoleto and 55% of the people in the top 500 have him, right? Because considering 55% of people have him, and I lost, my rank was reduced by a little over 55%, I do think a lot of this is just straight up due to the Bortoleto pick. Obviously, there's other things in there as well. There's people who had vastly different strategies that just didn't perform as well. But in the end, I do think a lot of this is just simply due to that swing of having Behrman over Bortoleto or just having Ocon over Bortoleto over some people. So top 4K, but 3,125. Amazing overall rank. I'm gonna see if I can keep it and not start dropping. But considering how many blue arrows I've had over the course of the season, literally only dropping in rank in one weekend, being last week in Austria, I'm gonna try my best to keep it going, though I expect it will be quite difficult unless I do a certain thing in Spa. So fantastic week for me, F1 fantasy wise. Fantastic week for Hulkenberg, and let's begin talking about what my plans are for the sprint weekend in Spa. Surprise, surprise, we're not actually starting this transfer plans portion of the video over on the budget builder site on F1 Fantasy Tools. We're actually starting over on the statistics site, because what you can do over on this statistics site is that you can go into this races tab here and just remove, well, whichever races you want, right? And I've done that, and now I've sorted by average point scored over these four, previous races. And you will see a certain someone has appeared. Yeah, Nico Hulkenberg is the second highest scoring driver over the past 4 races. Now, granted, that makes a lot of sense considering what he has achieved during these last 4 races, but you could argue that Nico Hulkenberg probably deserved the driver of the day in like Spain and also Austria. And even when he hasn't scored a massive point score, he's still got 15 points for 8 overtakes and 8 positions, scoring 4 points and gaining 3 positions in the race. So that was like his bad week. It was Canada, where he still got 4 actual points towards the championship and gaining 3 positions, starting from 11th, making 8 overtakes. So I don't know what Sauber has juiced into their car, but it's Apex GP worthy. Spoiler for the F1 movie, right? And yeah, he's the second highest scoring driver. Obviously, if you also remove Canada from there, which is Norris's DNF, Norris jumps over him, but just slightly. And again, you could argue that Hulkenberg deserved the driver of the day, both in Spain as well as in Austria, right? He didn't end up getting it, but I think definitely for Spain he should have got it, and definitely for Austria he should have been the second highest in the vote after Bortoleto. But he wasn't. So 48 points this week, absolutely massive. 16 positions gained, 15 points for getting third, 10 points for the driver of the day, 7 overtakes made. Absolutely mental performance from him. Will that continue? And we've been talking about since Spain, right, on this channel and on other F1 Fantasy, other F1 Fantasy content creators have been talking about that as well. We are waiting to build the 2 premium driver, 2 premium constructor builds, right? That's what we have been building budget towards. And we've mainly talked about it in the context of like Piastri plus Antonelli, Piastri plus Russell, as being the sort of lineups you could maybe afford. Piastri, Russell, Mercedes, McLaren has sort of been the end goal, at least for me, right? Kimi Antonelli being sort of a pit stop, I suppose, on the way to getting to that budget, and maybe skipping out on the McLaren constructor. We were discussing that after Canada when McLaren had a bit of a downturn in form. Maybe we go with Ferrari, Mercedes as our 2 premium constructors, and then we run 2 premium drivers with that. But for this time or this period, if you've had Nico Hülkenberg for these 4 races, which I think you've at least had him for the past 3, right? You've already been running a 2 premium driver lineup, because Nico Hülkenberg is performing better than Russell, way better than Kimi Antonelli. Obviously, Antonelli has had multiple DNFs during this time, so it's kind of difficult to judge where Kimi is as an asset and during this time, right? His non-DNF over the past 4 races was his 3rd place in Canada. So Kimi Antonelli is just outliers on both ends of the spectrum right now. So we really cannot judge how good he is of an F1 Fantasy asset until he just has a normal race. But when Kimi Antonelli's had normal races previously in the season, right, if we start adding some of these other results back, he has gotten to Q3, which is where that car belongs, right? But he's not done that much else with it and ended up on a 14, 15, 11 pointer when he's not had those massive overperformances. Obviously, these negatives are very, very concerning. But I also don't think most of these aren't his fault, right? He's only had like 1 that was properly his own mistake. So in terms of Antonelli, I don't really know where to put him as an asset right now, but if you're buying him, is this what you should be expecting? You have 14, 15 points. Russell, who, has been quite an overperformer so far this year in terms of our expectations, right? Especially at the start of the season. Are we also expecting him to now be around 20 points now that Ferrari has picked up some pace and they do look to be the second fastest team, despite their mishaps in Silverstone? Do we really want them? Is for the price that you get Russell and Antonelli from? Wouldn't you rather just have someone like Hülkenberg who's going to qualify poorly? And I'm not saying he's going to climb from 19th on the grid to 3rd every single race, but if he just gets to, I don't know, 9th, like he did in Austria, that's still 20 points. And again, I'm not sure Hülkenberg is going to do that every single race, but him scoring even a 15-pointer, which was his bad weekend, right, in Canada, is enough to be a differential, right? Or, not differential now because everyone owns him, but different to the Russell Antonelli lineup. Because if you have someone like a Hülkenberg scoring 15 points, and then that also allows you to have someone like Alex Albon, if he can start pick up his performances again after those, triple back-to-back DNFs, scoring a 14-pointer. I would much rather have Piastri plus Hülkenberg plus Albon than something like Piastri, Russell, and Colapinto, right? Because even when Colapinto's not DNFing, he's scoring 5, 6, 2, 5 points. So the difference in price between like Hülkenberg and Albon plus, compared to someone like a Russell, makes me think having those premium midfield drivers right now are just better than going for the 2 premium driver lineup. And until we see that change, or until our budget is high enough to run like Piastri plus Leclerc, I think I'm gonna stick with just switching the budget drivers to whatever looks the best, right? So for now, at least for me, the 2-2 lineup is put on hold until it looks better, and I'm probably gonna wait until other people take the leap of faith and switch to it, and it actually looks better in terms of points for me to switch to it and just keep building budget with these premium midfield drivers, right? Continually running 2 premium constructors. Now, with that said, there is a chance I do something crazy in Spa, and let's go over to the budget builder side quickly to just, you know, show some of the data here, right? We have a couple of good performers in terms of the cheap assets, and then Gabriel Bortoleto is, I guess, somewhere in the middle because of his 25-pointer and minus 20-pointer, and then there's just a massive drop-off because of all the DNFs we had. So I do think there's a clear pick of where you can go here. Obviously, you can keep Lawson or Colapinto because they can't decrease in price at 4.5 million. But yeah, again, after that DNF of Lawson, do you really want to have him for the next 2 when you can just buy, I guess, Alonso or stretch it to a Gasly at 6.6? I would much rather have a Gasly than a Lawson or a Colapinto or a Hadjar at a point like this, right? So very clear top echelon. I mean, well, mid echelon, I suppose, if you compare to Hulkenberg, who can literally DNF and still increase 0.6 million. Which is crazy. We haven't seen this sort of number on the driver side of things so far this year. We've only really seen it on the constructor side. And speaking on the constructor side, one chip that we have to discuss is the 3X, right? The 3X triple DRS chip is a chip which should always be used in a sprint weekend when you have 2 premium drivers. And I'm not talking Hulkenberg here. I'm talking like actually 2 drivers that are going to win it. And McLaren, after their upgrades, look absolutely dominant. I mean, it's not even a competition. And Max can try best he can, but I think even if Max had not spun, I think Max would have probably been P3, right? If he'd not had his spin. And Red Bull had, you know, gotten the strategy after that correct, which I think they did. So, right now, having both Norris and Piastri, unless they're going to fight each other and DNF, but I don't think that's going to happen. Because if that happens, the papaya rule's going to disappear, and they're going to start using team orders to not fight each other. I think using the 3X right now, while McLaren are super dominant and clearly the 2 best cars on the grid, is a really valuable idea. Partly because the other 3 sprints of the season are quite late. And maybe after the summer break, there will be upgrades. Maybe Ferrari come with that upgrade they've been talking about. Mercedes are bringing upgrades pretty soon. Red Bull, we have no idea what they're doing, but presumably they're going to upgrade their car as well. If that brings the field closer together, I still think McLaren is probably going to be the fastest, but you never know, and it could be more even. And in that instance, it becomes more difficult to predict, which 2 drivers you want on the 3X. Because how the 3X works is that you get an extra DRS boost that's worth triple points, and you still have your regular 2X boosts, for those of you who did not know. And that's why you want to use it in a sprint weekend with 2 premium drivers, because obviously you can't use the DRS boost on a constructor. So I see a lot of merit to using the 3X this weekend in Spa, just because it's so clear which 2 drivers you want it on. Now, to do that, I obviously cannot do it with with McLaren and Ferrari. It would have to be Ferrari to go. Even if I somehow had 1 million transfers, I only have 3, and could downgrade everything to the cheapest possible, get Mercedes in here, put Lando on the grid, pick the cheapest assets. I'm not even close, right? You can't afford this. So the asset that would have to go is Ferrari. And the asset I would bring in, we talked about this before, in the lead up to Silverstone, would be Kick. Would be the Kick Sauber. And the reason for doing this, 1, budget, but 2, Hulkenberg is driving like a maniac right now, and I could afford to do Ocon to Lando. I don't think, let me double check actually, because I can't remember. Okay, I could do also Behrman. So I could choose Behrman or Ocon. Obviously, I could do Hulkenberg to Norris as well. I'm not doing that. One of the Haas guys to Lando Norris and use the 3X. I can actually exactly afford this, doing it with Behrman. But it would be Behrman or Ocon to lead the way for Lando Norris here. 2 free transfers. I can easily switch back to Ferrari after. And I can use the 3X. Does this, with Kick Sauber here, outweigh the benefit of doing it with Ferrari here, and then maybe in the future doing it with like a Piastri plus Russell for a sprint weekend? I'm not so sure it does, because if we go to F1 Fantasy Tools and you go over to the live scoring here, I can actually, if you input you can input manual teams here. If you're, subscribed to the premium version, you would have your teams here. Ignore my team 3. This I don't play with this team anymore. This was some experiments early in the season. But if you look at this manual team I made here, if you ran McLaren Kick, Norris, Piastri, Hulkenberg, Behrman, Alonso in Silverstone, I even put Norris here as the 2X, despite Norris getting outscored by Piastri by a point, because if I had Norris plus Piastri in Silverstone, I would have put the 2X on Norris. You actually outscore the team that I had with 5 points. And this is with Kick, and there were other constructors that scored way more in the cheap constructors that I've seen people use. I've seen people with Aston Martin, right? Obviously some people had V-Carb and they got absolutely shafted, but even then, Kick Sauber only scored 17 points because of Bortoletto's DNF, whereas Aston Martin and Haas had really good scores. With Kick Sauber, triple McLaren, you outscored this team over here. I do think a lot of people who did run McLaren Kick had Bortoletto in their teams, but considering I wouldn't have bought Bortoletto prior to the weekend, if I had gone for a Kick build, I think I maybe would have skipped out on Bortoletto as well. I don't know actually if I could have afforded it, to be fair. I think it would have been close, but I digress. If you could afford this team without Bortoletto, it outscored the method. So that brings me back to my actual team here. I can now afford, it doesn't matter what I had previously. Maybe I couldn't afford this exact team this exact team in Silverstone. I can afford this exact team now. And this exact team looks pretty good. And even with this, I would have an extra transfer to do something based on the sprint qualifying. Because it's a sprint weekend, the sprint qualifying is before the deadline. The deadline will be before the sprint race, right, in Spa. So as always with sprint weekends, you should always wait. I mean, this goes for every weekend in F1 Fantasy, but especially for sprint weekends, wait to make your transfer until after you've watched sprint qualifying, because what happens in sprint qualifying may alter your decision slightly, especially on those midfield drivers. You would rather get someone who qualifies further back, who has the options for overtakes, than get someone who is qualified in like P11 or something like that, right? So everything can obviously change. Nothing about this team is final. I just really like the look of going for the triple McLaren lineup here in Spa, when we know the McLaren has been so dominant lately, and use this opportunity to activate the 3X, get as big of a point score as possible, and then pretty much immediately after go back to a 2 premium driver lineup, would go back to a 2 premium constructor lineup, especially for a race like Hungary, which comes after Spa. Hungary is a very low overtake track, so for Hungary, I would really like to have 2 premium constructors and not run with a Kick Sauber in case there's no overtaking opportunities, especially considering the likes of Hulkenberg and Bortoletto have qualified pretty poorly in the last couple of races and only really been there for their big overtaking and big positions gained point scores, right, in terms of their F1 Fantasy potential. So the plan right now, the preliminary plan, is actually to go for this, is actually to use the 3X in Spa, and then immediately after, if I don't use any other transfer, I will have only used 2 transfers here, and then immediately after just sell Norris, sell Kick Sauber and go back to probably Ferrari or Mercedes if Mercedes look better in Hungary for some reason. And then I have the option to go for almost any cheap driver that I want, right? Anything from Ocon and below I can afford, you know, given some price rises here and there that could obviously change some things as well. But I mean, this makes me super flexible for Hungary as well after Spa to see which driver I sort of want. One such option is Carlos Sainz that I've already talked about being a fantastic option for later on in the season. Right now he looks awful, right? Because he needs 47 points for a price increase. And granted, he did only get he only got, you know, he got negative points in Silverstone after that incident with Leclerc. He got negative 1 point. But you know, once that minus 20 point is out after Spa, if he gets a decent point score in Spa, he could still be on for a price rise in Hungary, right? And I would want someone who can qualify highly in Hungary as a sort of cheaper asset, right? So Sainz is definitely one that could be there. You know, he qualified, he was P9, I believe, in Silverstone after some, you know, after Behrman's penalty and stuff like that. So Sainz definitely one I'm eyeing up for future. Albon, another one that I'm interested in getting back into once his DNF is out of there and, you know, he can actually start increasing in price again. Granted, after Hungary, do we really need them to increase in price anymore? We just want them to get as much as, you know, as many points as possible. And we've seen what Albon can do when he's not DNFing. He is that kind of driver to get up to 15 points ish per race. So perhaps I don't really care about the budget of a specific asset. Perhaps I just care about being able to get Alex Albon in there. So that's sort of what I'm eyeing up. If I'm not going for that, I realistically don't even really see a reason to use a transfer. I think this team that I have right now could probably work. In Spa, that's how good this team was in Silverstone, that there's no reason to make any transfers, right? 0.6, 0.6, 0.6, 0.6 increases across all of my cheap assets. The one thing I could go for, I guess, is getting Lance Stroll in there if I would want to, just to make a transfer. Maybe it would be Ocon to leave the way for Stroll, just because Stroll looks more likely for a price increase. But again, I'm not even sure I would, you know, go for that. Realistically, you know, Stroll can always pop out with a stinker, and Ocon has also been really consistent throughout the year. So I wouldn't even necessarily say that the Stroll is that much better than what Ocon is. I guess he's 0.4 cheaper, but it's not like, you know, that matters at all to me. So realistically, if I'm not going for the 3x play, I don't think I'm making a transfer. I really don't. But of course, there could be something like, you know, with Behrman, a large grid penalty popping up for the sprint or the main race, wherever, right? I would also have the flexibility of making that transfer, even when going for the Lando kick version, especially if I do it for Ocon here. Say, I don't know who would necessarily be the option here. Maybe Pierre Gasly, right? Pierre Gasly is a good option. Maybe Isaac Hadjar, right? If I don't care about the budget, I only want his points. Maybe he gets a 10-place grid penalty for God knows what. I do have options to facilitate that sort of move as well. So I'm personally very interested in going for triple McLaren this week to use the 3x. That is definitely my preliminary plan heading into the weekend, but obviously it's 2 weeks away. A lot can happen, as we just saw with Christian Horner's firing. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to hit 5k subscribers before the end of the year. We just hit 3.3k. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for all of you who were at the deadline stream last Saturday before Silverstone. It was my biggest live stream ever to date, with over 740 people peak viewers, which is absolutely crazy. So thank you so much if you were there for that. More videos are coming on the channel in this little mini summer break, I suppose we can call it. Sometime in these 2 off weeks that we have coming up, I will post a video about how to save your F1 fantasy season. So if you've had a poor season, or you have had a good season so far, but your budget is really lacking, I'm going to have a specific video out just for you, so make sure you subscribe so you do not miss that. Thank you so much for watching this video, though. Like it if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.